Greetings everybody around the world. It's time once again for Ancient Aliens Radio. This is the dedicated radio show for the cast of Ancient Aliens. Here we interview authors and researchers as an ongoing investigation into the ancient alien theory. Don't forget to like us on Facebook or subscribe to the YouTube channel Ancient Aliens Radio. This is your host James, and I've got a super exciting show today. We're going to get into everything from giants, aliens, demons, angels, UFOs. We're going to be talking to Mr. L.A. Marzulli. Let me tell you a little bit about today's author, L.A. Marzulli, author, lecturer and filmmaker. He's penned over 8 books now, including the Nephilim trilogy, which has made the CBA bestsellers list. He's received an honorary doctorate from the series from his mentor, Dr. I.D.E. Thomas, and he was the provost at Pacific International University. His new series, On the Trail of the Nephilim, is a full-colour, oversized book which uncovers startling evidence that there has been a massive cover-up on what he believes are the remains of the Nephilim, the giants mentioned in the Bible. And I believe On the Trail of the Nephilim 2 is coming out today, and what better person to tell us than our guests. Hi, LA, welcome.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, James. Appreciate it. Great to be here.
It's great to have you here, LA, and I love your work. You're a very, very thorough researcher, and that's what I love about authors like yourself, LA. You put so much time and energy into this. Of course, I'm going to mention a little bit the Watcher series, the DVD series that you do as well on the show. LA, where do you get your energy from? You're so busy.
No, I hear what you're saying. I guess I'm just a little sometimes wound up too tight.
Yeah,
I hear what you're saying. It's just I'm excited about what I do. I love researching the biblical narrative. We're trying to prove the biblical narrative, and it's just fascinating to unearth and the different objects and the different skulls and objects that we have found since we've been on the trail. And it's always wonderful to be out in the field interviewing people that are experts in their particular field of endeavor. And it's just fascinating, or people that have had an experience like we talk about in many of our Watchers series. So it's just I'm a blessed man in that regard.
Oh, wonderful. I'm glad you mentioned the biblical narrative there. I know you're coming from a Christian perspective, LA. Could you tell us a little bit about personally how you got into the Christian faith? Were you born into it? Tell us a little bit about your background, some of your personal circumstances. And I think this is very pertinent to what we're going to talk about today.
Well, I appreciate that. I was born, raised Catholic. And at 13, I left the church. I was just very disillusioned with the pageantry of Catholicism. There was nothing there. There was certainly no connection with the Most High God, the God of the universe. It was just pageantry and a ritual, which made no sense to me. And at the time, later on, I began to read different books, New Age, what you would call New Age books about higher consciousness, gurus, third eyes being open. Carlos Castaneda had a big effect on me. The Adventures of Don Juan, Yaqui Way of Knowledge, and all that. The Mahatmas in India had a big impact on my life. Out of the body experiences. All this was taking place in the early 60s. And of course, the Beatles brought in Eastern mysticism. And on the heels of that, by this time now I was like 20, 21, and still searching, still looking. The Vietnam War was going on. It was a very tumultuous time. And looking for answers, trying to find out if there was a God, where was he? I mean, what's the secret of life? What are we doing here? I had a lot of questions. And I saw this brochure that said the God of the universe is now here. And I went down to the program, and in walked this little 14-year-old kid by the name of Guru Maharaji. And I found myself laying on the floor, bowing to this kid without knowing why. I followed basically everyone else in the audience's lead. When he walked on stage, he was like 2 hours late. Everyone hit the deck. It's what's called in the gurus in Hindi, pranaming. I prostrated myself in front of the guru. And the next day I received knowledge. We listened to the guru that night for probably 3 hours. And he invited us to come back the next day. And so I went to this place, and there was probably 100 people. We packed into these 2 rooms in a house, and we received knowledge from this Mahatma. This same Mahatma would later go on to hit a man over the head with a hammer for saying something nasty about the guru.
Wow.
So much for love and peace. But wow. I received the knowledge, and it was an experience. I mean, I actually saw white light. and not just from squeezing my eyeballs together. I mean, I saw visions and stuff. I heard celestial music. I tasted what they would call divine nectar. Now, at the time, there was nothing in my paradigm that enabled me to weigh the experience. To look at the experience and say, well, where's the source of this coming from? Is it a benevolent source or a malevolent one? After I promptly joined the ashram, gave up all my belongings, and believed that this 14-year-old kid was, in fact, God incarnate on the planet. And so I joined the ashram, became a follower of the Guru, dedicated my life to him, wound up playing in the Guru's brother's band, and toured some of Europe, specifically in England, and then, of course, in America, wound up in Los Angeles. By this time, I had begun, there were cracks in the system. And I realized after about 3 years, 2 to 3 years of meditating, of getting up at 5 a.m. every morning, of changing my diet, becoming a strict vegetarian, and yada, yada, yada. I mean, everything right down the line. I couldn't put it in what I would now term Christian parlance. I couldn't do that at the time. I had, again, no paradigm to bounce it against. All I knew was that I had not been changed. That even with all the meditation and you know, basically laying my life down and giving up everything, becoming a complete renunciate, leading my life for the Guru, that this bliss that I had been promised, this internal happiness wasn't there. In fact, I remember in Houston, we were getting ready for the big Houston Astrodome event, which was an absolute catastrophe. And that event was sort of the seeds of my own doubt, because they were expecting like a couple 100,000 people or 100,000 people, whatever it was, to fill the Houston Astrodome. I forget what the Astrodome holds, but they were expecting a lot of people. They got under 20,000 people. It was a flop. Nothing happened, and it was bizarre. But I remember in Houston getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning and going into this room where there was a dais set up for the Guru, and there was a chair there. And the chair always had candles burning and wreaths and food offerings and all this other nonsense. And laying, prostrating myself in front of the picture and weeping bitterly, because internally I hadn't been changed an inch. Nothing had changed internally. I was the same guy. Nothing had changed. Even with all the meditation and the astral projection and all this stuff, nothing had changed. And so I finally left and became an agnostic. This is when I was about 25 years old. Wow. So from 25 to 30, I was a devout agnostic, still kind of searching, but didn't believe in a whole lot of anything. And when I was 30, I began to read these books. One of the pivotal ones was a book by David Hunt called The Cult Explosion, I believe it was called. And in the back of the book, there's a little prayer. And when I was reading The Cult Explosion, it went through Carlos Castaneda and Guru Maharaji and EST and, you know, AC Bhaktivedanta and all these different, you know, so-called pathways to enlightenment, many of which I had tried and dabbled in. And at the end of the, you know, his case was that all these were false systems, and having been involved in many of them, I readily agreed they were false systems. So he was pointing the way to Yeshua, the Hebrew name for Jesus. And it sounded very interesting, but I was alone in my room, no television, no church service, nobody pounding me over the head with the Bible. It was just a very simple prayer. And I said, because there was a little call to, you know, prayer at the end of Hunt's book. And I just said, look, I don't know whether you're real or not, Jesus, but if you are, come into my life. That was it. That was all basically I said. Wow. And about a month later, things started to change. That was 34 years ago. I am now a pastor. I minister full time in the gospel. And I tell people, it's not what you think. It's not the stuff you see on TV. It's not for many people, it's not the nonsense you've been brought up in, with all due respect to the church, of which I am part. A lot of it has been obfuscated by ceremony and the trappings of men, by the scandals, look at the Catholics with the pedophile sex scandal.
Oh, yeah.
How can you reconcile the two? You can't. It's a heinous crime. It has nothing to do with the Jesus of the Bible. confessions, dark confessionals, candles, priests, vestments, stained glass windows, monks, rosary beads, nuns, the Crystal Cathedral out here in Los Angeles. All this nonsense that we see a lot on Christian TV has nothing to do with anything. 2,000 years ago, a man walked this earth. Mm-hmm. And at that time, there were no cathedrals, and every little stuff I just mentioned, none of that existed. Mm-hmm. But everywhere he went, people were healed of everything. If they were deaf, he could heal them and they could hear. If they were blind from birth with no eyes, the eyes would grow. If they were lame, the limbs would grow. If you had leprosy, which was a death sentence in the ancient world, you were healed. And he walked on water. Everywhere this guy went, goodness followed him. And he stated, look, I'm the Son of God. It's who I am. And I'm here and I've incarnated. And what happened was his blood sacrifice on Calvary changed everything. We're in a cosmic war, James.
Sure.
And that blood sacrifice was necessary to defeat the forces of evil. If you want to look in terms of Star Wars, that's basically, it's like Darth Vader against Obi-Wan Kenobi.
For sure.
Except, that's the analogy you would use. But we're in a cosmic war and that war continues. And so by accepting him as Savior, everything changed in my life. And that's 34 years ago.
Wow. It's kind of like you just come back to grassroots and you kind of went off the rails in a way and kind of try it. And like you do, a lot of people, what you actually described as Catholic Ireland. You're coming today from Catholic Ireland on the radio here. And how many people here at the age of 13 just get so disengaged from the Catholic Church here? All the boys, they just don't get it. They don't get the ritual. They don't get the ceremony. It's kind of backward in a way, the whole church doctrine and the bureaucracy. And like you say, it's such a movement now that's really losing numbers. LA, and it's sad, and I think there is a lot of good in the church. I think there's a lot of problems with some of the structure and the politics that goes on. And like you say, look at the scandals. Ireland's not no stranger to all the scandals you mentioned. Let's fast forward to where we're at today, LA, because you're doing some pioneering research. You really are, LA. And this is kind of pertinent. Now we can talk about so many different topics today. We only got you for a short time. I want to do justice. I guess focusing on the book, On the Trail of the Nephilim too. It's out today, I believe, LA.
Yes, it is.
Wow.
I leave here and go up to the warehouse and meet the truck. So.
Oh, wow.
There you go.
There we go. Well, tell us the premise, for the book. Because obviously, let's get into On the Trail of the Nephilim 1. Why the inception of the book? You've wrote a few today, I believe, but this is really kind of narrowing in on some very, very strange, factual data.
Well, it is. And this is the 9th book I've written. It's called On the Trail of a Nephilim 2. I'll just give you a smattering from a table of contents. Mm-hmm. Preliminary DNA testing results from a geneticist. We took samples out of Peru, not we, but this man by the name of Lloyd Pye took samples out of Peru. And we had preliminary testing done, and this geneticist contacted us with the information. And it was absolutely startling. The Raman datas, the Raman spectroscopy, we took a hair sample from Peru, which we were able to do by the man by the name of Juan Navarro, who owns the Paracas History Museum. And this was hair that was not attached to the scalp, but came from a red-haired skull, which we believe is at least 2,000 years old. Mm-hmm. And we compared that with normal human hair, dyed human hair, and the red hair from Paracas, and a white hair from a man who was abducted and forced to have sex with a hybrid being. And it's startling what we found with the Raman spectroscopy. I spoke to a Navajo elder. We have a conversation in a chapter with a Chief Joseph Riverwind about the Native American talking about the Native American oral tradition and legends about the giants that were there. We found this artifact in Michigan by Bob Shelley, actually found the artifact and brought it to us at a conference. And this thing is almost 32 inches long, and we believe it's a lance. And it's bronze made out of very pure copper, and it's a very old artifact. We're not sure how old it is, but Chief Joseph Riverwind was there. And again, he's the man that we spoke with and came in on the record for On the Trail 2. And he believes that this is actually a a Nephilim lance. The oral tradition of Native Americans talk about these giants with these lances. John Boragina, the curator of Catalina Island, comes in on the record and tells us what he discovered there. Bernard Zipfel talks about the Berg-Aukus femur, this very large fossilized femur that he has in South Africa. Bruce Fenton comes in and weighs in on this lost city in the jungles at 14,000 feet above sea level up in Ecuador, this huge pyramidal complex and these large, what we would call Nephilim hammers that are the handle, not the handle, just the head of it is longer than your forearm. Absolutely unbelievable. We talk about what we found when we went back to Peru, specifically the elongated skulls, which we believe are not all, or all of them are not the result of cradle headboardings. And we talk about that. We returned to the Chongos necropolis. We went to this bizarre place called Chongos, where the Paracas royalty, these people, or whatever they were, with these elongated skulls, were buried. And they show up out of nowhere 3,500 years ago and disappear about 2,000 years ago. And no one knows why. And that's just, some of what we talk about. The Solistani Towers, these enigmatic towers found near Lake Titicaca, 13,000 feet above sea level, made out of basalt, 13,000 feet roughly above sea level. These conical shaped towers made out of basalt, ashlar construction, no joints. Each stone is different, and it's smaller at the bottom and goes larger at the top, which begs the question, how, in the Neolithic era, thousands of years ago, were people who only had copper chisels able to make this? And it just defies all logic. You can't make it. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And there's a whole chapter on that. So we're really excited about On the Trail of the Nephilim Volume 2.
Wow, fascinating. You mentioned the Lloyd Poy there. I sad to see him go, really was. I think I was probably one of the last ones to interview him just before he was diagnosed. And where's his research at today? Because I know you mentioned the DNA. Is the results out? Is there? I mean, he was researching many things. Has anybody actually carried on Lloyd's work? Is it just yourself?
Well, it's not really me. I mean, the only, if you go to the Star Child Project, I'm online now and I'm just hitting it, starchildproject.com, and the site appears to be active and it's their latest updates and all this. So it's, it's up there, the DNA evidence. So the site is still working and, on and on it goes. Again, Lloyd was able to get samples out of Peru 4 years ago, well before he died. And he had them tested, and we are now in Lee with his geneticist. We're excited about what we may find with the Paracas skulls.
I'm guessing the mainstream biologists aren't embracing this in any way. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, is there a backlash there?
As far as what?
The mainstream biologists, like any of the genetic evidence, is there? I'm guessing you can't go to get this stuff tested in an ordinary laboratory.
Well, you need a real geneticist, and just getting the samples out legally from Peru proved to be very onerous in the sense that we've got an archaeologist in Spain, 2 in the United States, and 1 in Peru, all working on the proper paperwork. And this has taken months to get the samples legally out of Peru for DNA testing at a lab. We have a contract with the geneticist, and we're trying to, move the ball forward.
You mentioned the Native American tradition talking about these race of red-haired giants. What validity do we have about the six-fingered phenomena, L.A.?
Well, one of the amazing pictures that I found at Catalina, and I was on Catalina Island, and I got to give you the backstory before we get into the punchline here. Catalina is part of a chain of islands called the Channel Islands, which basically run from a little south of Los Angeles up into Santa Barbara. It's a string of islands, and Catalina is about 27 miles from Los Angeles. And there, at the turn of the last century, around 1911, this man by the name of Ralph Glidden performed primitive archaeological digs out on these islands, and he was employed at one point by the High Museum. The High Museum later on is gobbled up by the Smithsonian Museum. So that's sort of an interesting sidebar in itself. And according to the curator that was there when I was there, John Borgina, there allegedly was this cache of records, pictures, journals, paperwork from Ralph Glidden that had been lost. And the museum is held in the Wrigley Theater building, which is this large circular building, and it's held in the basement. That's where the museum is. So John Borgina is up in the attic one night, I guess, or one day, rummaging around, trying to find if he can find these lost records. And he comes on this trunk and he opens the trunk up, and all of a sudden he realizes, oh my gosh, here are her lost records from Ralph Glidden. And the LA Times actually publishes an interview. This goes mainstream. The LA Times gets a hold of it. It makes the front page because it was big news. And I heard about it through Jim Watson, who wrote a book called Mysterious Catalina. And I met with Jim, and one thing led to another, and he put me in touch with the president, or John Borgina was the curator. So this is like, the director of the museum. And it took months of haggling back and forth. And finally, I was able to make a donation for $1,000, and they allowed me to come in and look at the artifacts that were there. When I arrived, everything had been cataloged and sorted. So this is in L.A. Marzulli arriving and looking into a dusty trunk. Mm-hmm. This is L.A. Marzulli looking at museum boxes with manila envelopes and folders, and everything cataloged, marked. The photographs, many of them were in plastic sheets to protect them. I had a pair of white gloves. I set up my camera. There were 2 tables with white paper on them. The museum boxes were there. The whistle blew. Let the fun begin. And the first thing I did was begin to look at pictures. And after a very, very short time, I began to find photographs.
Wow.
One of the ones I found, which is, of course, you mentioned the 6 fingers. That's why I'm going. One of the ones I found, in that cache of photographs clearly showed a skeleton with 6 fingers on both hands. And these were fully formed digits. These weren't like a little spur off one of the fingers. These were fully formed 6 fingers. Now look, we get it. There is polydactylism, and we know that. We understand that. Mm-hmm. And that is a genetic trait which happens in some cases in some people. Mm-hmm. But Native Americans tell us that there was a race of beings that were here before them with 6 fingers and sometimes double rows of teeth. And that's what was so interesting. Unless you're looking for 6 fingers, you could turn that page and not even see it. You wouldn't see it. But I'm looking for that. And the moment I saw it, I went, oh my gosh, look at this. And we've had that photograph analyzed. And we now believe, because there's a bowl that is lying next to that skeleton, that skeleton laying in situ, discovered by Ralph Glidden, circa 1920s, is in fact a giant just under 9 feet, which fits the Native American oral tradition.
Wow, this is mind-blowing, LA. This is mind-blowing. It must be satisfying for you, LA, to go out and find evidence and document this stuff still. A lot of this stuff's been scrubbed from the record. Maybe just talk about that, the Smithsonian cover-up. You talked about that in Trail of the Nephilim 1. Why wipe the Nephilim out of existence? Why wipe these race of red-haired giants out of existence?
Well, there's many theories on this. The theory that we're going on, some of it with the oral tradition from Chief Joseph. The tribes themselves fought against the red-headed giants. Mm-hmm. We know from the Paiutes, when you go down to the cave in Lovelock, the Lovelock Cave, and I spoke to a Paiute elder down there. And the legend goes that they rounded up these red-haired giants, they pushed them into a cave, and they told them that you either change or we're going to kill you. And the giants refused to change, and so they lit the cave on fire, the mouth of the cave. They piled brush in the cave and kept on piling brush in the mouth of the cave and lit that on fire. Now, the cave was excavated, and the cave had 2 wings that went back to the left and back to the right. The Bureau of Land Management sealed both of those caves. You can no longer go in there. They were scoured by archaeologists. I've got some of their reports. There were human remains found. Apparently there were large red-headed mummies found. Those have gone missing, like many of the other sites. We found some artifacts, which will be in On the Trail Volume 3, which I'm working on, which I can't talk about right now because we're still working on that. But when I spoke to a Paiute elder about the legend, now, this is what she told me, that's what happened hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Hundreds of years ago. And this is in their oral tradition. And what's interesting is when you're in the cave, and I've been there, you can see that the roof of the cave has been blackened. And it seems to hold the oral tradition that the Paiute Indians went up against these red-haired giants and annihilated them. But we also get the same tale happening in the Iroquois Nation that formed a pact and a treaty with another tribe, and they went up against the red-haired giants who were cannibals. So this is what we believe happened all throughout the Americas.
Wow, that's fascinating. Of
Yeah,
course,
it is. It's absolutely.
it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Now, we also associate these guys with the mounds. Is that correct?
Wait, say that again?
The mounds, the Nephilim architecture in America.
Sure.
We're definitely associating these guys, these red-haired giants, with those specific constructions.
And this is where it goes right off the map. When we go to places in Ohio, specifically the Great Circle Mound in Ohio and the Octagon Mound in Ohio. Mm-hmm. Now, those are the two sites that I have been to. And I've been to other mounds and other sites in and around that area. I've been to mounds in Wisconsin. And we go and we look at these areas. And modern day archaeologists try to convince us that Native Americans built these. But in talking with Chief Joseph and other Native Americans, they insist that no, Native Americans did not build these. These show mathematical sophistication, engineering sophistication, architectural sophistication, solar alignment sophistication. With all due respect, not only to Native Americans, but many cultures throughout the earth at that time, they did not possess those skills. They weren't there. They weren't there. And when you go to the Circle Mound, mainstream archaeology will try to tell us that Native Americans built this using clamshells to dig with, or flint, which would break in most cases. So clamshells and dog sleds with birch bark baskets. And that's how they built these. And when I've spoken to Native Americans, they just look and laugh. There's a book by Vine Delorean called Red Earth, White Lies. And he talks about all this, that all this is just made up. Some archaeologist gets there, looks at the evidence and interprets it through their paradigm, which, by the way, has to conform with the Darwinian paradigm. And so,
sure.
Since it has to conform with Darwinism, it's going to hold the party line. And that's intellectual fascism, in my opinion. Then you get someone like me, and I'm not an archaeologist, but guess what? I dug a fire pit. I've been in Ohio. I dug my first fire pit. That's graduate level work. You don't get to dig your first fire pit until you go through all the courses. I've been to the Chongos necropolis. I've looked at the artifacts. I've held a 1,000-year-old warri slingshot in my hands. I've been right to a recently excavated grave where the Wakaros have come in and stripped everything and found three, along with Brian Forrester, found three elongated skulls. I've seen potsherds. So many that it's just you can't count them at Chongos. I've seen mass graves with elongated skulls in Camacho, in Peru. I've been to Sacsayhuaman. I've touched the stones. I mean, I've been all over the place looking at this stuff. And it's very extremely enigmatic. And in my opinion, it points to another culture, another race that preceded Native Americans that were here, that built these edifices, these artifacts, these complex sites. When you go to the Octagon Mound, which at one time was adjacent and part of the same complex in Nurkahaya, part of the Circle Mound.
Sure.
It lines up every 18.6 years with a lunar cycle.
Lunar.
Yeah, I mean, how is that possible? How do they know that? And the Great Circle Mound, again, it's done with precision. And all these sites point to, in my opinion, an outside agency, which is interfacing with human beings. And in that interfacing, they are creating a hybrid race, which becomes the royalty. And they are here for a time. They are worshipped as gods. They create ziggurats and temple complexes. And then for some unknown reason, they vanish.
The outside agency, this transfer of knowledge, what's the benefit for the group of people that are getting the knowledge? Are they getting, is it malevolent?
Well, knowledge always comes with a price.
Mm-hmm.
These systems demand human sacrifice. All of them do. All of these false systems, all throughout the globe, in every case I've studied, I'm not saying it's 100%,
sure.
But in the cases that I've studied, everything from Chichen Itza to the Circle Mound in Ohio,
mm-hmm.
To places in Peru, in Lima, all show evidence of human sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And that begs the question, why is that going on?
Yeah.
You know, and that's not a good thing. Their gods demand blood, and they demand human sacrifice, human blood. And we see it over and over and over and over again. There's a quid pro quo. In order to appease their god, that god, human sacrifice must be engaged in. So it's very, very bizarre stuff. And we see it in the Middle East,
mm-hmm.
The human sacrifice to Moloch and other demonic gods, fallen angel gods. And we see it in places like Teotihuacan. I mentioned Chichen Itza, Corral in Peru, the oldest city in the Americas. Once again, human sacrifice was discovered there. So that's what we're looking at, and that's troubling to me.
Sure. Ella, you mentioned the intellectual fascism of Darwinism. I'm with you on that one. I mean, and I always have heard, I've had a few people on the show, Michael Creamer being one, but, you know, I always talk about Darwinism because I got problems with it, and I don't need to be from a religious faith. You don't need to be, you could be just an average Joe Soap on the street, but I mean, and you can still find problems with Darwinism. You don't have to be religious. And I actually, maybe you agree with me, I find the Darwinists to be more religious in their doctrine than anything.
Well, the Darwinism is a religion, and that religion, that paradigm, a Darwinian paradigm, is held sacrosanct in both academia and the scientific community. And there's a great movie that shows that. I talk about this endlessly. Ben Stein's movie Expelled. It shows very, very graphically the subtitle of that movie, Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. And that's exactly what it is. You will either hold to the Darwinian paradigm or you don't advance. You don't go anywhere in academia. In fact, you can lose your job, you can lose your tenure. And Stein sits down with many people who go on the record and tell them exactly what happened, for even mentioning intelligent design, that there could be a creator behind all this. It goes against the Darwinian paradigm. And of course, this goes back into the 19th century and early parts of the 20th century, and into the 21st century, where any artifact or any evidence that might show a chink in the armor of Darwinism, it is immediately dealt with. And I realize that sounds incredibly conspiratorial to some of your listeners, but having been researching this now for years, this seems to be the case. The evidence always goes missing. In fact, John Boragina, the former curator of the Catalina Museum, the person who found the cache of records, he examined everything at first. He went on the record in my book and stated openly, that some of those photographs that were in the collection went missing. I wonder what those photographs showed.
Wow.
We'll never know.
Yeah. I definitely think there's a cleansing of evidence out there, LA. I'm fully convinced of that. I think a lot of the listeners are too. I think people are waking up to, you know, I think it's going to be incredibly hard for whatever groups of people on this planet to purely cleanse all the fragments of evidence off the planet. There's always going to be some threads of evidence there. And I think that's what we're at today, LA, talking about that. The risk of surviving. Probably a good point to mention America's Stonehenge, because you have that in the Trail of Nephilim 1. I actually had Dennis Stone on the show to talk about it. Right. And that kind of links up with the biblical region of the world, and maybe a reason why the Nephilim appear in the biblical regions of the Bible and also in America.
Well, that's exactly it. This is our hypothesis that when Joshua and Caleb went into the promised land 3,500 years ago, there was a mandate to exterminate the Nephilim tribes, and that's who was in the land. This gets back into this whole cosmic chess match. Why are they there? Why is this Nephilim central? What's so important about this area? And of course, eventually we see the city of Jerusalem, which is the apple of God's eye. That's the prize. Just like it was then, that's the prize now. Isn't that interesting? Thousands of years later, they're fighting over Jerusalem.
Wow.
But the bottom line is, and this is the work of Kelsey Stone, there's a henge called America's Stonehenge. And Kelsey Stone, on sort of a lark, and I covered this on the Trail 1, went out to where this drove, it was on Google. So, on Google Earth. And he takes a line with his ruler on Google Earth and draws it from the center of his henge out to the summer standing stone. Now, this henge, America's Stonehenge in New Hampshire, shows when you stand in the center of the henge and you look to the summer standing stone, you will see the summer solstice sunrise. The summer solstice sunrise, the longest day of the year, come up right over that standing stone. So Kelsey went, gee, I wonder what happens if I extend the line. So he extends the line from the center of the henge out to the summer standing stone and continues and continues and continues. And eventually he winds up in stone intersecting the center trilithon. And a trilithon is two upright stones with a stone across them on top. He winds up, that line winds up intersecting. So a center trilithon in Stonehenge, England. That, my friend, is an impossibility. There's no way in the ancient world you can do that unless you can triangulate. And the only way you can triangulate is from space.
Yeah, that's like high tech. That is high tech computerized.
It's high tech all the way.
Yeah. And the line keeps going into Lebanon.
The line keeps going.
Is it Lebanon?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's mind blowing. I remember the episode. I can't remember where I watched it. And the line just keeps going into the biblical region, into Lebanon, and it's like, you know, it's too good to be true. It's too good to be true, but it is. You can see it. It's like tangible.
Well, it is, and the fact that it winds up, in Beirut, Lebanon, and what Kelsey and the Stone family didn't know. And this is where my research took it a step further, is Beirut, is the home of the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians are an offspring of the legendary Canaanites, and the Canaanites are a Nephilim tribe. When we extend the line further, it goes right near Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is the area, the mountain, and this is the work of, well, it comes from the book of Enoch, that Enoch talks about, but 200 watcher angels descended in the days of Jared, on Mount Hermon, and that's where that pact was formed to go into the daughters of men and create this hybrid race known as the Nephilim. When you extend the line further, the line goes into this place, which I would call Nephilim Central. It is also 47 and a half miles south of Baalbek and 47 and a half miles north of Gilgal Raphaim. And what's interesting about this, Gilgal Raphaim is, Gilgal is a stone circle, and the Raphaim are the Nephilim tribes. And Baalbek, which I believe, was a huge site, was built by the Nephilim. There are skeptics who will look at these stones and say the Romans built them. Recent archaeological discovery in Baalbek shows that underneath the stone of the pregnant women are two other stones hasn't been seen probably since the days before Rome, which means that the Romans didn't cut these stones, which goes back to what we call Nephilim architecture.
Wow, mind blowing, LA. Okay, so the Nephilim, or we're saying the Nephilim originated in biblical regions, let's say Middle East or Lebanon, around Syria, stuff like there. Why was there an exodus because of persecution? They flee to America. Is that why the Paracas people are popping up on the grid?
Well, here's the deal. You get this weird mandate from the God of the Bible, which I believe in. But when you read it, and if the first time I read it, I was taken aback because it's genocide. The mandate is for Joshua and Caleb, 3,500 years ago, to go into the promised land and wipe them all out. Wipe out these inhabitants, wipe out these tribes, men, women, and children, burn everything. Now that's genocide. There's no way around it. Unless we are looking at a hybrid being who is dwelling in the land who is not supposed to be there. And what's interesting, when we go into the book of Numbers, which is part of the Torah, we read in Numbers chapter 13 that the Nephilim were in the land. And then later on, it talks about the different tribes of Nephilim. So our hypothesis is simply this, that as Joshua and Caleb began to go into the promised land and conquer, the Nephilim tribe saw what was happening. And some of them fled the area and went north into Europe, and then eventually found their way into the New World, settling in the Ohio region and going down from there. Other tribes built boats and went out the Mediterranean Sea. Mm-hmm. And we know this because Thor Heyerdahl in his book Raw proved that you could make a papyrus boat and you could make it to the New World in a papyrus boat. Mm-hmm. So that's the second exit that they would have done. The third is out the Red Sea and into the Pacific. And all we know that if that hypothesis is true, then we should see evidence of these tribes, these Nephilim tribes that were in the Americas. And this is where we go right off the rails because we do. We see the evidence. We see it, in my opinion, in the Paracas skulls. We see it in the mound builders, and other edifices like what we find in New Hampshire, the America Stonehenge. But we see it in the Newark Great Circle Complex, in the Octagon Complex, in Cahokia, in the Nephilim architecture, and the oral traditions of giants, which were the creation of the Star People, according to Native American legends. All the tribes, we go down the Paracas, we see these elongated skulls, we see the ziggurats all through South America, we see cities like Corral just springing up from nowhere. When you go down to Corral, which is about 3 hours north of Lima, Peru, and you go there, there's no culture that precedes whoever built this thing. The city just is there. It just comes about. The knowledge arrives at the same place at the same time. How is that possible? There's no progression. In modernity, there's a progression. You get the Industrial Revolution, where new technologies begin to replace old ones, inventions. But there's a progression. You can go back before the Industrial Revolution. The steam engine changed everything. Steam engine, changed everything.
Mm. For sure. Let's talk a little biblical scriptures at the moment. You mentioned the Book of Enoch. Can you tell us a little bit, kind of maybe quote if you have to, LA, describe the Nephilim. What do we know about them physically from the biblical scriptures, their practices? What can we actually deduce about them as a people, as a race?
Well, the best place to really get into this is Josephus, which is an extra biblical text. He was a first century Jewish historian, mm-hmm. and he wrote about the Nephilim in several places. And frankly, I use some of his quotes in my work. But the biblical account is certainly there. For instance, David and Goliath is a perfect example. Goliath, in our opinion, was a Nephilim. Og, the king of Bashan, in the northern part of right at the Israeli-Syrian border today, right near Mount Hermon. Og, the king of Bashan, the last of the giants, the last of the Rephaim. So the biblical account is there and tells us that 6 fingers, 6 toes, giants, Goliath, huge, Og, king of Bashan, Ishbi-Benob is another giant mentioned. They're all through the biblical narrative. Josephus writes about it. And let me just read you a couple of those because those are really interesting. For which reason they removed their camp, talking about the Israelites, to Hebron, and when they finally had taken it, they slew all the inhabitants. Okay, the Israelites slew all the inhabitants of this place. There were till then left the race of giants who had bodies so large and countenances so entirely different from other men that they were surprising to the sight and terrible to the hearing. The bones of these men are still shown to this very day, unlike to any credible relations of other men. Now they gave the city to the Levites as an extraordinary reward. So this is what's going on here. This is from the biblical narrative. A little afterward, the king made war against the Philistines. And when he had joined the battle with them and put them to flight, he was left alone as he was in pursuit of them. And when he was quite tired down, he was seen by one of the enemy. His name was Achmon, the son of Araph. He was one of the sons of the giants. He had a spear, the handle of which weighed 300 shekels, and a breastplate of chainwork and a sword. Interestingly enough, the 300 shekels turns out to be 7.5 pounds, which is the same weight that we find in this Nephilim lance that we see and found up around Lake Michigan, which is on the trail of the Nephilim too.
Hi everybody and welcome back. This is your host James and we are talking to L.A. Marzulli, author, lecturer and filmmaker. L.A., why don't you just give us out your website there one more time?
It is lamarzulli.net, www.lamarzulli.net.
Of course, you can catch everything you do there. You've got a great blog there and everything to we're going to mention a little bit of the Watcher series as well. I do want to get that in towards the end of the show, LA. Great DVD series, box set. You're still going with the Watcher series, yeah?
Yeah, we finished up Watchers 8 and we took a little break from it. We're going to start back in January with Watchers 9. Wow. And we'll keep cranking them out.
Wow. Okay, we were just talking before the break there, LA, about scriptures and Josephus, Book of Enoch. Why is the Christian faith struggling with this stuff? I mean, when I say struggling, I mean, if I was to go into any denomination, Protestant, Catholic here in Ireland, and start talking about the Nephilim, I would be ousted out, LA. There we go. What's this guy? This guy's a crank. Get him out of here, you know? And I'm serious, you know, and it's like, you just don't hear about this stuff. It's kind of been pushed out of the, you know, Sunday school as such.
Well, it is and it isn't. The bottom line is that if we go back again to the Hebrew Bible and we read Genesis chapter 3, we get a very insightful piece of what I would call startling information. And it says, I will put enmity between your seed. And he's talking to the fallen angel at this point. He's talking to Satan. Mm-hmm. I'll put enmity between your seed and the seed of the woman. And that's literal. And that's what's going on. And we've been at war forever. Mm-hmm. It's happening now. This is what links the two phenomena together. Mm. I talked about, at the very beginning, I talked about the Raman spectroscopy. Might be a good time to talk about that.
Sure.
The Raman spectroscopy is so important to us and the testing that was done. Is it conclusive? No. But along with the DNA evidence, it's starting to show us that, and this is our hypothesis, there's an outside agency that is manipulating the genome. Mm. And with the Raman spectroscopy they were testing, there were 4 hairs that we had. A normal human hair, that was our control sample. A dyed human hair that was there because we wanted to see what dyed hair looked like. The red hair from the Paraka skull, which, by the way, we estimate is at least 2,000 years old. And a white hair from a man who had been abducted by a female hybrid being. And he was raped. And when he awakened the next morning, he found several hairs on him. And he took the hair. So we have 4 hair samples we're conducting here. The human hair and all this is plotted on a graph. Raman spectroscopy. The human hair is on the left-hand side of the graph, comes in, goes out. The dyed hair, bottom of the graph, shoots up straight through the top of the graph, it's gone. This is where it gets interesting. Mm-hmm. The 2,000-year-old red Paracas hair and the white hair from the abduction track each other. The slopes are almost identical. Wow. And frankly, that shouldn't be there. Mm-hmm. And when we saw that, we fell out of our chair. It seems to create a link between what happened thousands of years ago and what is happening today in the modern day UFO abduction phenomena, which points back to Genesis 3, your seed will be at enmity with the seed of the woman. And there it is. There's a breeding program which has been going on, in my opinion, for thousands of years. Off and on, off and on, off and on. The remnants of the Nephilim are all around us, but it has been mostly kept down and obfuscated. Think about this, James. Mm-hmm. Only with the advent of the internet has any of this been able to surface. Only with the freedom of the internet have people been free to discover. Because go back 30 years, there's no way to track any of this stuff. There's no communication. Brian Forrester never would have been in Peru with a video camera posting it on YouTube that I would happen to Google and see.
Sure, exactly.
That's what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I've actually brought this up a couple of times, even just on simpler, ancient, historical, mysteries, none of this stuff. I mean, it's people are networking together in a unique way now. And I think it's a great thing. I think there's some dark sides to the internet too, LA. There's a sinister side to it too, right? For the better part, I think it's a great thing, and there's a freedom of information here. I mean, I know a lot of people just, if they want truth, they go to the internet now because they'll get it somewhere. Whereas, some mainstream news channels, you're going to get a synthesized version of it. And I do think there's a truth embargo on a lot of topics.
Absolutely. All day long, truth embargo. Stephen Bassett sort of coined that term, I think. And
yeah, for sure.
Hats off to him. There's a truth embargo. There are certain factions of academia, the scientific community, which tenaciously hold on to their paradigm, which is a faith, which is a religious paradigm. In much the same way you could fault the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages for doing exactly the same thing. If you read the Bible, you're condemned to death. I mean, that's crazy. Mm-hmm. And that's what's going on here. What it really reminds me of is Planet of the Apes, the first movie.
Yeah.
Don't go in the forbidden zone. Oh my gosh, go to the forbidden zone. And that's exactly where we are. You can't look at this. You can't look at that. Mm-hmm. No, you can't go here. No, we can't find this. No, we can't show you. For instance, I'm at one museum, and there was this very large spearhead, very large. And underneath it said, this was a ceremonial spearhead used by the Hopewell Indian, the mound builders. And I looked at my friend and I said, baloney. They don't know where it was from. In other words, the viewer is told this in a museum. This large spearhead was ceremonial. Well, where was the spearhead found? They don't tell you that. Was it found next to a 9-footer? Because if it was, mm-hmm. then it's no longer ceremonial, it's utilitarian. Yeah. And see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
And this is, they control the information. You can't look at anything. Mm-hmm. Any object that goes against the Darwinian paradigm is dealt with.
LA, there's a lot of people out there, and if you say any of this stuff to them, even historical, ancient mysteries, Nephilim, any of this stuff, and you go, there's a stranglehold on the information, and they go, why would a university or why would somebody do that? Why would they, censor this stuff like? And I go, it's not about why they would. Don't ask the question why they censor this stuff. Look at the evidence first, and then that's a secondary question, not a first. And if you do that and you just sit and you look at the evidence, and I know that's what you do, Ella. You go out in the field and you grab this stuff like bull by the horns.
Yeah, I'm in the field. I'm in the field a lot. Look, a perfect example is the Shroud of Turin. We interviewed Barry Schwartz, who was the part of the 1978 STIRP research team that went to Turin, Italy, and he was up. They had 120 hours to look at the shroud. Barry was up for probably about 110 of them. I mean, he was just relentless, and because it was a chance of a lifetime opportunity.
Oh, sure.
He shot everything. This is before digital photography.
Yeah.
And he told me that when the carbon-14 testing came out, that a university was given a £1 million donation from an anonymous source, thanking them for proving that the shroud was a medieval fake. And what happened with the shroud, and I know this right from the horse's mouth. Mm-hmm. The carbon-14 team was there to test the shroud. And there was a protocol which had been established. years in advance. You just don't call up and go, hey, we'd like to come over and carbon-14 the shroud. Yeah, come over next Tuesday. Baloney. Everything. You come on this date. We'll take 3 samples from different parts of the shroud. Everything was spelled out. I mean, it's like a contract. This is a priceless artifact. 3 samples were supposed to be taken from the shroud. The day comes to take them. These guys in suits come walking in, shut the whole thing down, and later on they let the scientists back in and they go, we're going to take 1 sample from the corner of the shroud here. What? The protocol that was established out the window. So these scientists take the sample, they carbon-14 date it, 3 different labs, they all date it to medieval times, 15th century, 14th century. Okay, the shroud is a medieval forgery, everyone laughs. Mm-hmm. A lot of the people who look at this stuff and all the preponderance of evidence surrounding the shroud that pointed to authenticity left us going, what? That doesn't make any sense. Sure enough, about 20 years later, actually more than 20 years, a husband and wife team who are not scientists at all begin to studying the shroud and believe that what happened is that the sample that was taken was contaminated because there was a fire in the 15th century.
Ah.
And the poor sisters of Clare, who were expert at creating invisible weaving in tapestries, which is pretty much a lost art, mm-hmm. were hired by the Vatican to restore the shroud. They theorized that if that was the case, then you would be able to see at a microscopic level end-to-end splices in the shroud. And so one of the members of the Shroud of Turin, mm-hmm. who had part of that sample that was given to the laboratories to test, went down to his lab, took the sample, put it under a microscope, thinking to himself, I'll debunk this in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And when he went down and looked at the sample and examined it, he was blown away, taken aback, because what he found was precisely what these 2 lay people had theorized. He discovered end-to-end splices on the Shroud of Turin, and he realized that they were not linen, they were cotton, and the cotton was dyed to match the fabric. Mm-hmm. The reason why I'm telling you this story is that there's an agenda. Yep. There's an axe to grind. Anything that's supernatural, anything that points to the supernatural goes against the Darwinian paradigm. Thus, if there is a supernatural, if it points back to the biblical narrative, which all my work does, and if the biblical narrative, if we can prove the biblical narrative, and that's why we're on the trail, because it's pointing back to the biblical narrative. And if the biblical narrative is correct, what else in the biblical narrative is correct? And then it gets into salvation and the crucifixion and the blood of Jesus and mankind's sin nature. And it blows the Darwinian theory right out of the water. Because Darwinists don't know. When Ben Steiner's movie Expelled, always go back to that, sits down with Richard Dawkins, where does the first self-replicating molecule come from? Dawkins has no stinking idea. Doesn't have a clue. And so all you can default to is, well, maybe millions of years ago, in a race far, far away, a galaxy far, far away, a race of aliens who have, themselves would have got to a high point of civilization, created mankind and then seeded us through the universe. And we wound up on planet Earth, which was suitable for life. Presto changeo, here we are. That's all he's got. That's all he's got.
But that's ludicrous in itself to even suggest that.
In himself. It's circular reasoning.
Exactly. Ludicrous circular reasoning. Wow. On the Turin shroud, I actually knew about the splicing of the shroud, but I didn't know about the medieval, and the fire and all that.
Of Clare.
Wow, that's fascinating, LA. What a fascinating research the whole, Turin has been, the shroud. Not only that, the actual image of Christ that's in it, there is no known technique for, even if you wanted to force that, even if you were in the medieval, even if you were in the modern age, there isn't any known method of actually imbuing that image into the cloth as well, is there?
No, there isn't. I've come to call the Shroud of Turin God's calling card, because that's frankly what I think it is. And it demonstrates graphically the greatest event on the planet. this God-man, Yeshua or Jesus, rising from the dead, like he said he would. And that is a prototype of where some of us are gonna go at some point in time. And that shroud, I mean, here's the deal. Secundo Pia took a photograph of that in, well over, I don't know, I forget exactly the date, but many, many decades ago. Let me move this. Hold on, James.
All right, brother.
And Secundo Pia, took a photograph of the shroud. He was, and this is in the nascent days of photography. In fact, I'm going to Google it here. Secundo Pia, and I can give you the exact year in a second. Put Shroud of Turin. But what happened is, he's taken the shroud, he's taken the pictures of the shroud, and he goes back to his laboratory, and the first shroud photo, where is it? 1862? I don't think so. Yeah, it could be. Nope, that's not it. I'm just where is it? Why can't I just get the stinking date for it? Ugh. Anyway, the bottom line is he takes a shot of the Shroud of Turin, and he goes back to his dark room, and he begins to develop this thing. Okay, so Secundo Pia, May 28th, 1898. All right? 1898. So remember, the shroud is a cloth, and they can see an image of a man on it who seems to be crucified. So Pia takes the shot of the shroud, goes back to his dark room, and these are glass plates. That's how everything was done. It's old-fashioned photography, all right? 1898. I mean, it's over 100 years ago. And he starts to develop, and he almost drops the glass plate, because what comes up in the solution of chemicals, because that's how it works, is a positive image. What should have been there was a negative image. It's not. It's a positive image, which means that the shroud is a negative image, and when photographed, the negative becomes the positive. And there's no way you can fake that. You can't fake it today. In medieval times, there's no way. And now we theorize that there was, and this is the work of Dame Isabel Pixek, who we actually interviewed in our Watchers series. She believes that there was an event horizon where time stopped and gravity ceased to be. Literally, an event horizon, singularity, and the body that was laying in that tomb was levitated, and the shroud was pulled taut, and that body levitating off the slab, because there's no indentation in the buttocks or in the shoulders. If the body had been laying in the shroud, you would see the buttocks pressed in and the shoulders pressed in. It's not. She theorizes that the body levitated, the shroud pulled taut around the body, and then the body dematerializing in infinite points of light, basically a singularity. And this is astounding. And, when you look at this and you look at the Shroud of Turin, and it's like, it's a mind blower. Well, even with all the evidence, including the carbon-14 dating, which since has been reversed, now, the skeptics can't go there anymore because it's been proven that it was deliberately skewed. But they always bring it up year after year and try to, tell the public that it was carbon-14 dating, carbon-14 dated to the 15th century, when nothing could be further from the truth. And this is what, it makes you wonder, how can a person sit there in front of a camera knowing that the carbon-14 dating was skewed and has been proven as such by the poor sisters in Clare, look right into the camera and lie? The guy's got an agenda. Yeah. The guy's got an agenda, and so do the Darwinists. They have an agenda. Anything supernatural goes against that agenda, and that's why it's suppressed.
Sure. Yeah, and that's what I wanted to focus on. That. It's a great example that you brought up, and glad you did. This is a supernatural artifact from a supernatural person, from a supernatural time in history. And I do believe even today there's supernatural forces at work on this planet. It's going right back in deep antiquity, for sure. It's always been there. The Bible is full of supernatural events, and they're so numerous to mention. Where does the Nephilim fit into this? Are we going to see these guys return? Is this where we're looking at now? Are they coming back as a supernatural force?
Well, this is a controversial passage. I get a lot of flack from people, but Jesus warns us. Yeshua warns us. And remember, this is what's so fascinating to me about this. When he utters this, and this is why it's always got to be kept in historical context, that there is no church, no cathedrals, no priests, no confessionals, no candles, no altars, no nothing. There's nothing. It's Jesus walking around with 12 guys that he's handpicked. That's it. It's all he's got. There's nothing else going on. And he says one of the most absurd statements you could possibly utter. Basically, when I return, it'll be like the days of Noah. What? What the heck? Who do you think you are? Telling us this. What do you mean when you return, it'll be like the days of Noah? And this is what's amazing about it. He truly is the Son of God. And he's telling us this stuff 2,000 years ago. When the Son of Man returns, it will be like the days of Noah, which immediately points back to what differentiates the days of Noah than any other time in history. And it's the presence of the Nephilim and the fallen angels interfacing with the men and women of earth. That is precisely what we see now in the so-called extraterrestrial or alien breeding program and implanting program. This is what we see. Men are taken, sperm is taken from the men. Ovum is taken from the women. Men are forced to copulate with female hybrids, vice versa with the females. They're often re-abducted years later and shown a hybrid being. We hear this over and over and over again, to the point now where Dr. David Jacobs, who we interviewed in Watchers 7 and Watchers 8, believes that these hybrid beings look and can pass as human and now are beginning to integrate into our society. Can I prove that? No, I can't. Not yet, but we're working on it.
No. I think this is what the Watcher series does is, you're independent. You have this, academic approach to this. You're looking for evidence. It's an evolving, series. It's an evolving story, as we say. The thing for me, what's going on with the whole UFO phenomenon in LA, according to you? It's so confusing out there for people. There's a lot of disinformation. Where is the disinformation coming from? Is the disinformation coming from the people above, the ones that are watching us, or is the disinformation coming from governments? Is it coming from both? Out of all the data out there, you cannot wash it all away. There's a tangible thing there. What do you think is the UFO phenomenon, in your opinion, your theory?
Well, in my opinion, this is what I've coined and labeled the coming Great Deception. Mm-hmm. And this links to Darwinism. Mm-hmm. It's inexorably linked and connected to Darwinism. There's no doubt about it. Darwinism cut the knees off of the Christian worldview, at least in Europe. And when that happened, it left a vacuum. And that vacuum was, well, if there is no God, no supernatural, how then were we created? We see shows like Ancient Aliens, which are promulgating the ancient astronaut theory. We see movies like Prometheus several years ago, which are promulgating the ancient astronaut theory. We have, which I've already mentioned, Richard Dawkins, who promulgates the ancient astronaut theory that we were seeded here by a race of highly evolved extraterrestrials. Guess what? It's everywhere. This is the paradigm that is being to the people all around the globe. Mm-hmm. And when they return, this is the coming Great Deception, and they will return. And when they return, they will tell us that they created all life on this planet, that they genetically manipulated early man, that they started the world's civilizations and religions, and now, at this critical juncture in human history, they, E.T., are back to usher mankind in to a time of peace, prosperity, and knowledge. And oh, by the way, we have this small little implantable chip, which is a DNA upgrade. Take this chip, you'll live 300 to 500 years disease-free. You'll be able to buy, sell, or trade. All your identification will be on it. It's a DNA enhancer. It's an upgrade. And the line for that will be around the block. And that will also, in my opinion, dovetail into ancient prophetic texts which warn of exactly this type of a mark. And what's interesting in Watchers 7 and Watchers 8, we had a man who said he was abducted 40 years ago when he was 5 years old and had an implant. And we tested the implant with various scientific instruments. And in Watchers 8, we were in an operating theater and we extracted the implant from this man. So we know that the implants are real. They're tangible. They're not made of metal that we know. This is a highly classified, highly secretive project. When we were in the operating theater, the object was cloaked. We couldn't find the object. And we talk about that exclusively in Watchers 8. I can tell you more about it if you want to.
Oh, please.
But we have proof. We have proof that the phenomena is real.
Wow, fascinating. Okay, so in today we've got exopolitics. I actually get so turned off when I hear people talking about exopolitics, and I think people's brains have just literally dropped out of their heads. And I think they all want to see the aliens come and land and go and shake hands with them and go, hey, what's your civilization like? Give us all this technology that you have. I don't think it's going to be like that, LA. I think I don't think it has to be sinister either. I just think, keep your open mind on things, don't have to believe what you're told. You don't have to, you just, don't drop your brains out. Keep an honest mind at this thing, like.
Well, I look, if we really look at the abduction phenomena and what these characters are up to, in my opinion, it's no good. And Dr. David Jacobs, we disagree on maybe some of the particulars of the phenomena, but we both agree that it's highly malevolent. That's what we believe. Dr. Roger Lear, who spent years in the UFO abduction alien implant phenomena, the alien scalpel. I mean, that was his website, still is. And he was a great friend. He's in all of our Watchers. We dedicated Watchers 8 to him. He was a very close friend, was in every single episode. And at the end of what happened in the operating theater, and I'll tell you that story in a minute, because I'm leading up to it, I suppose. Dr. Roger Lear looked at me and said, L.A., I now believe that there's a supernatural component to the UFO phenomena. And James, let me tell you the story. This man came to us and said he had been abducted at 5 years old. When they first took him, he fought him off. They came again and got him. He went right up through the ceiling and was laid on a table. He was implanted. Years later, he started having excruciating pain in where the implant was. Excruciating. So the first step was we had him fill out forms and questionnaires. He wanted to remain anonymous. That's always a good sign. And we did an X-ray. And we found the metallic object right below the knee. We took him later. We got a CAT scan. And we found the metallic object right below the right knee. Then we took a Gauss meter, which measures the magnetic field.
Sure.
This little metallic object about the size of a pencil lead at the end of a pencil, measured 8.0 to 8.5 milligauss on a Gauss meter. Richard Shaw's fully charged camera battery was measuring 10.0 on the Gauss meter. How can a little object like this, in a man's leg, register 8.0 milligauss on a Gauss meter? It also was giving out a radio frequency, excuse me, of about 330 gigahertz.
Wow.
How's that possible?
Wow.
How's that possible? With a stud finder, the stud finder would show exactly where the implant was. Then we took him to the head surgeon, Dr. Matriciana, and he took a ultrasound, which shows you where the object is below the surface. And that's what it shows you, and it comes up on a monitor. And he took the X-ray, put it over the guy's leg, put a little black dot where the object should be, squirted some gel on it, took the one from the ultrasound machine. He found the thing less than 2 minutes. All right, guys, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. So January 4th, 2014, we're there with 3 camera crews, nurses, doctors. Dr. Lear's there, Dr. Matriciano's there. We've got 20 people in a room with an HD monitor watching the proceedings. Matriciano takes the X-ray, places it over the guy's knee, makes a little black dot where the implant is corresponding to the picture that he's holding, the X-ray that he's holding, squirts some gel on the guy's leg. We figure, okay, we'll be out of here in 20 minutes. And for the next hour and a half, and numerous times applying the gel, goes over the same 3-inch by 8-inch strip of leg. He can't find it. And at this point, he looks at Dr. Lear after an hour and 15, 20 minutes and goes, maybe we should get another x-ray. And at that point, I get the tap on the shoulder from the spirit of a living God. And he tells me, you need to pray. You need to do it now. Mm-hmm. And I open my mouth. I'm in a room full of people that don't believe like I do. And I say, guys, this is going to sound a little weird, but I'm going to pray and I'm going to do it now. And without waiting for permission, I prayed. And this is my prayer. Father, if there are forces which are cloaking this device, I pray that you would break their power and do it soon. James,
wow.
Less than 2 minutes later, the object appeared on the ultrasound monitor from nowhere. Everyone was taken aback. Everyone was blown away. Dr. Matriciana kept taking his wand off and on, the guy's leg to see that surely there must be something wrong with my machinery here. Nothing wrong with his machinery. What was sobering to us, they knew where we were, what we were up to, what we were about to do. They were tracking us. They knew exactly what was going on. And when we called upon a higher power, someone greater than them, he showed up and broke the stranglehold that was there, and we got results. And this is what I tell people who are abducted, who are part of the abduction phenomena. If you want to get out, there's a way to get out. And you call upon the name of Yeshua. You call upon the name of Jesus. That name is above all other names. And I'm not talking religious here. I'm talking about a cosmic war. When you call upon him, he will come to your aid. He will get you out of the situation.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, I think you're definitely doing something really good on the Watcher series. I know it's a different type of media, obviously, to the books. I recommend people to get copies of it out there. You've done what, eight DVDs now? 8 DVDs,
and we're working on 9 in January.
Wow. I look forward to number 9 coming out. LA, I know you've looked at the moon thing as well. What the hell is going on the moon? What is going on up there? I mean, I don't think we could believe a word out of NASA's mouth, personally. But I mean, it's so bizarre. I don't even believe half the NASA photos. I just find it incredibly. I watched the most recent one from the Sci-Fi Channel there, Aliens on the Moon. I mean, this is incredible stuff, like.
Well, it is, and as far as the moon is concerned, we did a series on it, a film piece on it, I think in Watchers 2.
Okay.
And we wondered why the moon seemed to be rotating. We have since sort of retracted our position on that. We went with the story because people were YouTubing about it and talking about that the moon seemed to be different. And we even had, some other stories like magnetic northward change and that type of stuff. So we knew something was up in it. We've done more research on it and we sort of backed off on the story. But the reason why we ran with it is because, wow, a lot of people were noticing it. And this is what's great about the internet. Go back 50 years and no, you wouldn't be posted like this. All of a sudden a bunch of people notice something and it's on YouTube, it's on the internet. While we can't trust everything that's there, it's certainly a great source of information.
Mm-hmm. Do you think NASA's covering up stuff up there?
Absolutely. All day long.
Do you think they know the extent of the problem, LA? Do you think they're maybe just covering something up until they find out, or do you think they're totally in the know and they have full knowledge of what's going on?
Absolutely.
Wow.
The insiders know exactly what's going on. This thing's been covered up. They are well aware that we are being visited on an ongoing basis and have been for decades and decades and decades. They know it. Mm-hmm. I believe that some of the technology has been back engineered. Philip Corso, and I understand that the bunkers will have a field day with him, but Philip Corso talked about it in this book, and he had no, government dog in the hunt. I mean, he was just, a guy telling everybody what he saw. I think there's back engineering that's going on. I believe that there are, I think a great series, which really has it wired, is Steven Spielberg's series Taken. Mm-hmm. Starts in World War II with the Foo Fighters and brings you right up to the present day with this hybrid being that they're interested in that is able to stop time. And that corresponds with the biblical narrative, which talks about the Antichrist. The Antichrist,
oh, sure,
the man who is instead of Christ, will be a hybrid being, in my opinion, will be a classic Nephilim, in my opinion. He will be Nephilim. That's what he will be.
Wow. Tell us about the Nephilim, going back to what we originally started the show with then. The return of the Nephilim, if you want, you can bring it in as well. I mean, there was originally 200 Nephilim, is that correct?
No, there were 200 watcher angels.
Watcher angels.
Watcher angels that fell to earth and came to earth
Mm-hmm.
and landed on Mount Hermon.
Mm-hmm.
In the days of Jared.
Mm-hmm.
Those watcher angels sired, took wives who, from whomever they wanted, they just took wives. Mm-hmm. And so there was a marriage contract, at least.
And it was
what was interesting, is they went into the women, and the progeny of that union between the fallen angels and the women, those are the Nephilim.
Sorry. So the offspring are the Nephilim. Sorry, I forgot that.
Yes,
the offspring of the Nephilim. The 200 watcher angels, are they punished for this? What do we know about the two watcher angels?
Well, the 200 watcher angels apparently were chained and are in a place called a gloomy dungeon. The book of Jude tells us that in the New Testament found in the Bible. And it tells us that these angels, these fallen ones are chained in gloomy dungeons. Tartarus would be the Greek word for it. And when Jesus descends into the bowels of the earth, this is a really interesting part of what we read in the New Testament. It's just incredible. Mm-hmm. You want to talk about sci-fi and supernatural. Mm-hmm. It's the most sci-fi book on the planet. It's unbelievable. Mm-hmm. Jesus is being crucified. He dies and he gives up his ghost. Then he goes, so he's telling someone about this later, obviously, because no one's going with him. So this is after he rises from the dead. Now he's telling, Peter, James, who knows? He's telling somebody what he did. He goes and he descends to this place where these watcher angels are. And it is a proclamation. Basically, in our opinion, he's telling them, guess what, guys? You're not getting out. I just got the keys to earth. Checkmate. It's over. You're not getting out. And that's why he goes there. And there's a paper by this theologian called Bullinger who expounds on this, which is absolutely astounding. And I find that just incredible. And so, we read about this stuff. The 200 watcher angels are chained. There are others. There is a second incursion. Why? Because Moses is writing Genesis, 1,000 years after the flood? Hundreds of years after the flood? Mm-hmm. And he gets to the point, if he would have written, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, period. Because he's writing about something that happened hundreds of years prior to him. So he would just say, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. There's one incursion. They all got wiped out by the flood. It's over, right? Mm-hmm. That's grammatically correct. That's how you would write it. That's not what he says. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. And also afterward. Whoa! Why would he write that? You get what I'm going with this? Mm-hmm. When the sons of God saw the daughters of men, took wives, went into them, that's the biblical, that's coitus. There's no way around it.
Sure. And
had sex with them, and the progeny were the Nephilim. And guess what? Sodom and Gomorrah, Nephilim. Mm-hmm. The Tower of Babel, Geborim. Nimrod was a mighty man, Geborim, Nephil, to fall. That's Nephilim. Mm-hmm. The Nephilim are in the promised land. Why? Because the text tells us. Joshua and Caleb come back around 3,500 years ago. What did you see? We saw the Nephilim there. Oh, really? It's right there. And then Moses is writing this at that time. Stating, that's where the book is from. Moses is writing it. It's the hand of Moses. The Nephilim are on the earth and also afterward.
Wow. Is the Elohim related to the Nephilim then? Are they another name?
No, Elohim's completely different.
Tell us what the Elohim is, because this is what I hear people talking that the Elohim and the Nephilim are the same, but they seem to be referred to as two groups of people.
Yeah. The Elohim, and you got to go into the book of Genesis and other places. Mm-hmm. It's a name for the Most High God.
Right.
That's what it is. It's the triune Godhead. the Elohim. That's what that is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. I want to finish up on biblical prophecy, because it is all about where we're at today. And I know a lot of this is about kind of research of who we are today, where we're at. This biblical prophecy being acted out, many animal die-offs that were, I remember watching that happen, and how much stuff is really going on in this planet for people to wake up. They seem to just ignore this stuff, L.A.
Well, they do. Again, look, most people are asleep. We are in a little, in a literal matrix. Mm-hmm. Think about the endless ball games, the endless changing, the changing of the cycles correspond with the endless ball games. Now, I got nothing against sports, okay? Nothing at all. Sure. But it becomes, some people can tell you who was the second baseman for the 1962 Yankee team. They know that stuff. And they don't, it's like, that's okay. If that's what you want to do with your life, that's fine. I'm not putting you down. That's okay. But people are, they're asleep. They're in the matrix. Mm-hmm. Obama gave me a cell phone. They're in the matrix. Endless ball games, endless circus, bread and circus on American TV. Man being swallowed by an anaconda. That's bread and circus all day long. Meanwhile, there's a cosmic war which is taking place above us, all around us. We are in some of the most tumultuous, tenuous times they've ever seen. Think about Fukushima, the radioactivity. Mm-hmm. It's now reached the west coast of the United States. Think about the record seismology, the record amount of earthquakes in and around Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. Think about the record cold, record drought, record temperatures all across the United States and the world. Think about the Ring of Fire operating where the earthquakes and the volcanic activity are going through the roof. Think about the Bartabunga, or the Ayatollah volcano, which closed the airspace over Great Britain and Northern Europe several years back. Oh, yeah. Both those volcanoes are now, erupting. Think about Yellowstone, which some people believe may go sooner than later. Think about the fish and animal die-offs, which is happening on a global level. Think about the Ebola virus. Mm-hmm. Think about the government, think about the wars and rumors of war that we see happening all over us. Consider ISIL, the Islamic State of Syria, Iraq, and the Levant. The end game there is to take over Israel. That's the end game. The prize is Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. The endless war, the threat of nuclear armament by Iran. Iran gets the bomb, they will go after Israel. There's no doubt about that. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Mm-hmm. Think about the famine. And Jesus predicts all this 2,000 years ago. Before I come in the last days, I'm paraphrasing, there will be wars and rumors of wars, famines, pestilence, earthquakes in diverse places, and troublesome times. That's exactly what we're seeing. And all this stuff is firing at the same time. If it was just one thing, we could go, well, okay, fine, no problem. But it's not. It's all across the board. Temperature records, earthquakes. I mean, look at the signs in the heavens that we're seeing. The outplaying of UFOs, the appearing of UFOs on a global level everywhere. The ongoing crop circles, the cattle mutilations, the human abductions, the human mutilations, the breeding program, the implants that we're seeing. You start putting all this stuff together and it's incredibly alarming. Look at the coming collapse of the American dollar, the petrodollar. It will happen. Mm-hmm. And when it happens, that's it. Think about the threat of the electromagnetic pulse weapon, which, third world terrorist countries like Korea or Iran could implement so easily by just converting an oil tanker, throwing it in the Gulf of Mexico, firing a warhead, a missile, 200 miles and detonating that thing over the heartland like Oklahoma City. Who cares about the fall from the radiation? That's not the deal. You've just short-circuited everything. Computers. Anything with a computer or electrical circuit, gone. Cars won't start. The grid goes down. Millions of people die. Mm. That's a real grave threat, and that could happen at any time. And America has done nothing to protect its citizenry. Mm-hmm. I mean, think about how many people are addicted to the drugs, which are prevalent all over the globe. Go back 50 years ago, there weren't rehab centers on every corner. Now everybody's family has one or two people that have gone through rehab. Unprecedented times we're living in, James.
Yeah, for sure.
The Bible tells us this will happen in the last days.
For sure. LA, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you today. I know we're at the top of the show. Just give us out your website one more time before we finish up, LA.
www.lamarzulli.net. You can avail yourself of the new book, On Betrayal of a Nephilim 2, the Watcher series. We've got some great packages and great deals. I promise you won't be bored. The stuff is a labor of love. We love what we do. And when you guys buy this stuff, it enables us to continue on, pay the bills, keep the lights on, put gas in the car, buy some groceries, go on vacation, and of course, get the next project out. And that's what we're doing now.
Oh, awesome, Ella. And I thank you for the sample chapters you sent me as well for On the Trail of Nephilim 2. Fascinating.
There you go.
I can't wait for it. Can't wait for my copy, so I'm going to be getting it very soon. Ella, it's an absolute pleasure talking to you again. I hope you're going to come back on and maybe do a Capricorn TV interview in the not too distant future. But again.
Oh, I'd love to do it sooner than later, James. Put me on, my friend.
Okay, brother. Look, great talking to you, and I'll speak to you soon.
Likewise.